Yeah.
It's George.
It's Elaine.
Come on up.
Hey, when you listen to...
I never heard anything like this in my life. Listen to this.
This is exciting! Huh? Did I miss anything already?
Kramer, get in.
Kramer! Where's the crazy man?
Hey, sit down. Come on, it's about to start.
Hey everyone, welcome to Seincast. I am so excited for you to listen to this week's episode. Recently, I interviewed one of the nicest, most generous people affiliated with Seinfeld, writer Peter Mehlman. We discussed the episodes he wrote during seasons 2, 3, and 4. They are The Apartment, The Nose Job, The Good Samaritan, The Virgin, The Visa, The Implant, and The Smelly Car. Now, Peter wrote on Seinfeld for 7 seasons, seasons 2 through 8. I guess technically season 9. Either way, this guy is one of the giants. He has seen everything. Now, before we get started, a few things. First, once again, the interview was recorded over Skype to a landline, so the audio quality isn't the best. You might hear a few helicopters, actually, maybe an airplane or two. I tried to cut out any delays or pauses in the recording. It should move pretty smoothly. You know, just like last week's interview with Tom Leopold, once Peter gets going, you'll be comfortable. But here's to hoping one day we'll get to conduct these interviews in person. Second, there is a little bit of uncensored, unbleeped swearing this week. I'm not too concerned about it, but just wanted to give those of you who might be concerned a heads up. Third and final thing, Vinny and I will be resuming our regular episode-by-episode discussion on October 1st. That's 2 weeks away, with the Season 5 premiere, The Mango. I thought we'd have an interview lined up for next week, but there's a strong chance we won't. So apologies for that. But if we don't have an episode next week, just check us out on social media. There'll definitely be some activity and fun posts there. Speaking of which, you can find Seincast on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram. You can email us, seincast@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support the show, please check out the donate tab on our Tumblr page. Also, if you're ever on iTunes, check out a Seincast there and leave us a rating and review if you'd be so kind. You can find Peter Mehlman on Facebook and Twitter. Also, check out his website, pmehlman.com. Also, he wrote a fantastic book, his first novel actually, last year, called It Won't Always Be This Great. So we highly recommend checking that out, picking up a copy. We'll leave a link in our show notes for it. Just wanted to thank Peter so much once again for appearing on the show. It's such an honor to get to speak with a Seinfeld legend like him. So hope you all enjoy the interview. All right, I'm joined by Peter Mehlman. He is the writer of 20 episodes of Seinfeld, also the author of It Won't Always Be This Great. Peter, how you doing?
I am doing great. You?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks a lot for asking. Thanks for being here once again.
Well, it's been good talking to you. Take care.
You know, Peter, I just wanted to give you some context here. We've been, poring over every episode of Seinfeld, and we just finished discussing the finale to season 4, the pilot, and we were thinking maybe we could go over all of your episodes from seasons 2, 3, and 4, if that sounds good.
Sounds great.
Cool. Well, let's start in the beginning with The Apartment. That was your first episode that you ever wrote on Seinfeld, and it was the only episode you wrote as it was a freelance gig, right?
Right.
Was there sort of like an audition of sorts? Because I would think with, as a freelancer, they're not, Larry and Jerry just aren't opening the doors to anyone to come write for them. Did they know that you would be a good fit when they gave you the job, or how did that work?
Larry, asked me for a writing sample that he could pass on to Jerry, and I, had no script. So I gave him a essay I wrote in the New York Times, and it was very New York. It was funny with a little wistfulness in it, which runs counter to Seinfeld, but I guess they forgave that. And, Larry was making this same offer to a lot of people, and somehow Jerry just loved that essay. It was basically, the whole thing was done based on that. It was pretty strange because all these other people were handing in writing samples and Jerry wasn't responding. And they were handing in scripts. And I hand in an essay and he responds to it. And, that was just the first step. Then I had to, get copies of the show because only 3 of them had been produced up until that point. So I had to watch the show. Then I had to come in and actually pitch ideas. And then if I got past that, I had to write a script. So it was, kind of like a triple elimination tournament. It was like the NBA playoffs. You had to go round by round.
Just the idea of a pitch, were you sweating, or was this just sort of like a fun opportunity for you at the time?
I saw the 3 episodes, and suddenly I went from, thinking maybe I'd like do some TV to thinking, oh my God, this is such a great show, and this is something I'd really want. So the fact is, I was nervous when I went in there, and Larry even asked me, he said, "Are you nervous?" And of course I said no. But, we pitched the idea, and I pitched the idea, and Larry Charles added a nice spin to it. And they said, go ahead and write it. I wrote it. I turned it in. Larry said, we probably won't get to read it till tomorrow. I'll let you know. And then I remember driving home. I stopped at my agent's office for something, and then I got home, and there was a message on my answering machine from Larry, and it said, well, we lied. We read your script, and we loved it. You're terrific. Really great. And, right then and there, I kind of had this feeling that my life was about to change.
Right. And from that point on, since you did just one episode in season 2, The Apartment, and it was a freelance gig, are you given the title of staff writer, I guess, for season 3 moving on, or is it season by season, sort of?
After we finished shooting the episode, Larry told me, if we get picked up next season, you got a job. And so, I had a job, and they hired me and Tom Leopold and Elaine Pope. And it was funny because, you're just having these first time in show business experiences would just pile up, like I was told that, the new writers would all be getting the exact same deal. And it turned out, of course, that I was a story I was what they basically a term writer, staff writer, and the other 2 were producers. So right off, I felt like I was kind of lied to, not by Larry and Jerry, but by Castle Rock. But, that was fine. Year by year, you kind of went up the ladder.
When I spoke with Tom Leopold, we kind of got on the topic of, and this goes from either Seinfeld or any show for that matter, the ridiculousness of titles. You know what I mean? How they
mean nothing. And the funny thing is, in my 3rd season, when I was, I had the title of co-producer, everybody on the set was coming up to me and congratulating me, and I had no idea what they were talking about.
Well, you got new business cards, I'm sure, right? That's all what it's all about.
Not even that.
Not even that, really.
No, not even that at all. I got a lot of money.
Sure. Well, I guess and a parking spot closer to the entrance, right?
I had the same parking spot. It was a good spot.
Could you just take like a couple of minutes here and sort of walk us through the steps of not only writing an episode, because it doesn't just end there, but the revisions you have to do and getting approval to actually filming an episode? Was it pretty consistent through all 8 seasons that you were there?
I wasn't actually there for the first season or the last season. But other than that, it was pretty consistent from season 2 through season 6. But in season 7, when Larry left, it changed things a lot. Then it became much more of a group situation.
Right. It just goes to show how much he was sort of, he was the captain, really, like steering the ship here and telling everyone where it's going to go and what directions.
Yeah, which was really exhausting. I mean, when he left, I was not the least bit surprised. If anything, I was surprised he stayed on that long, just because it was so much to do. And, that his last season was a terrific season. That was the season when George was getting engaged and Susan died at the end. It was, that was a great season. And I totally understood why he would, move on.
So it's no coincidence that you and Larry David, I guess, had pretty much roughly the same amount of seasons on Seinfeld.
Yeah, it was, basically the exact same number of years.
Mm-hmm. I heard from some writers, just reading articles online and watching interviews, that as a writer, it wasn't like you just, wrote an episode, you handed it in, and that was it. You sometimes had a hand in casting and things like that, right? Or at least got to speak up at those moments. Well,
if it was your episode, you would be in on all the casting sessions and, and all the editing. And so, you were much more intimately involved. Actually, by my third or fourth season, I was pretty much in on the editing of almost every episode. In fact, Larry would usually come by my office and say, you want to go edit? And, it would just be me and him for the first few passes. And editing was a lot trickier on Seinfeld than in other shows because we were so long on every episode. Most shows, in fact, all shows, when they would finish shooting, their first edit would be right around the 22-minute mark, which was where they needed to be. But we would be as much as 8, 9, 10 minutes long, and we'd have to edit it down. If you were 5 or 6 minutes long, it would help the episode tremendously. It would just make it, you'd cut enough stuff out to where it would just go much faster and better. Mm-hmm. So the editing actually was really good, and being long was really good. No other show in the history of sitcoms ever had scripts that were 70 pages.
We just covered the pilot, the season 4 finale, and we had heard that thing came in at 160, 170 pages. It was an hour long, but still.
Yeah, but part of that is also the format. Because in a live audience show, it's written like a play and it's double spaced, and then and every new scene has to start on a new page. And on Seinfeld, we had a million scenes. Kramer runs through the park. That's a page right there. Mm-hmm. Kramer goes to a drugstore because in that last episode, I believe that was when he had a massive constipation problem. So just his stories of going around the city trying to deal with that were probably 8 single pages right there. And then, you had all those tiny little scenes that were happening on the set of the imaginary Jerry show. So, believe me, there were a lot tougher ones to edit than that one. The contest was 9.5 minutes long.
Wow. And,
at one point, I was somewhere else working on something, and Larry brought in, the 4 comedians that we had on set that year, and he was asking them, what do you think we could cut here? And they suggested cutting all the scenes of them sleeping or not sleeping, and Larry was beside himself that they would think that.
That sequence, that little montage of them sleeping, says so much more than I would assume it would take 5 or 6 pages of dialogue to express what was just said in those 15 seconds.
I don't remember if we got any extra time for that episode. Later on the show just became such a juggernaut that, if we edited and we were still, 30 seconds long or 45 seconds long, we could get extra time. On Yada Yada, we got 3 minutes extra. We got 3 extra minutes of network time to fully service that episode.
I'm sure when you catch it in syndication now, it's probably under 20 minutes, I would assume, with all the commercials there.
Yeah, no, it's about 21:15 or something like that. I think they had to cut 45 seconds out of every episode.
a lot of our listeners watch the show still to this day on syndication. You know, they don't do the DVDs or Hulu for that matter. And it's such a treat whenever they get their hands on the DVDs or Hulu because they're getting this bonus footage that they never knew really existed.
Right. You get the full episode.
Well, let's move on to the second episode, the first episode you did in season 3, The Nose Job. What was the origin of that idea? The idea of, I think it had to do with Kramer, right? Being just such a loudmouth, saying what was ever on his mind.
I have a very, very close friend from college, and he lives out here, and his father has a booth in the jewelry exchange, like probably the most successful booth on 47th Street in New York. And he would say things to customers like, out of the blue, completely unsolicited, he'd say, you know, you're a very pretty girl, you should get your nose fixed. And he would just say this out of the blue. So I was thinking this would be great for Kramer, who's totally tactless. And so, you know, all you had to do is set up a scene where George is dating this girl who's got a large nose and is otherwise, you know, a beautiful girl. And, you know, he's talking about the nose with Jerry. And I was saying, I don't want to think about the nose. If she had a normal nose, she wouldn't even be in my league. But, you know, I can't help it. I can't stop thinking about the nose. I don't want to talk about the nose, but I'm talking about the nose. And then, you know, and then completely out of left field, you know, they're back in the apartment and they're talking, and Kramer had been to a nightclub. You know, there I was just looking for a way to set it up so Kramer could just, you know, so Kramer was talking about how he'd been to this nightclub where there were amazingly beautiful girls, and the girl with the nose says, there are so many beautiful girls in this city. I find it a little intimidating. And Kramer goes, no, you're as pretty as any of them. You just need a nose job. You know, and it was just, you know, like the hugest laugh. It went on and on. I mean, if you ever see that, if you look at that episode again, there are like 10 reaction shots to him saying that while the laugh is going on. So that was really gratifying.
Did you feel in those earlier episodes that you guys had time for moments like that? Because I feel like in the later seasons, and this might have more to do with post and editing, things just move a little bit faster. You don't get a lot of moments like that one with the nose job where you can just let it breathe and just, you know, cut to different characters.
Well, that was a big problem. That was a big problem at the end. It got to be like, you know, too many short scenes, too many things happening, you know, too many scenes that are basically in there to make connections for later, and not enough room in the show to have the kind of small philosophical coffee shop discussions that made the show what it is. So I definitely agree with you on that. You know, I always wanted smaller, and I don't know, the show in the end kind of felt like it was getting bigger. You know, that's why I kind of felt really good about Yada Yada later, because, you know, it was the last episode I wrote while I was on staff, and it was kind of a throwback episode. It was very small stories, and there was, you know, time for Jerry and George to discuss the merits of, you know, somebody who uses the expression yada yada, and then time for Jerry and Elaine to discuss, you know, whether the Raquel Welch joke was a Pope joke or a boob joke. You know, so I agree with you totally about that.
It's come up with a couple of my friends. A lot of us have gotten into the show, or at least I got into the show during the later seasons, like season 7, 8, and 9. That's more due to my age, but as I watch the show more and more, and as I mature, I'm finding myself drawn more to the first 4 seasons.
You know, Seinfeld at its best is really a show about Jerry and George in a coffee shop.
Well, you know, before we move on from the nose job, Peter, do you know someone by the name of David Blackwood by any chance?
David who?
Blackwood?
I do not know a David Blackwood, no.
He played the interviewer in the nose job. Again, it was one of those really quick scenes when George had spinach in his teeth. And he appeared in 7 Seinfeld episodes just as random small characters. And And I didn't know if he was like a friend of Larry's or a friend of someone's on the show, but he just always had these little cameos that was, I've just started to notice. I think he had his 5th one in the handicap spot.
God, I'm sure if I saw his face, I would know who it was. What did he play in The Nose Job?
He was the interviewer when, actually this makes me want to ask you a different question after this, but you know when George is talking about that he had like spinach in his teeth, and then it cuts to like an interview segment?
I don't remember that at all.
That was going to actually lead me to a different question, because that's The Nose Job is with Miss Crop Circles, right? The scene where Jerry's like penis and brain play chess.
Yes, Tony Katane.
Right. Now that episode, you know, it's early on. We're like in the first third of season 3. Something different happened in that episode, and I don't think it ever gets repeated. Maybe later on in the show when things moved a lot faster. But it opens up with Jerry and George at a newsstand, and they're talking. George's situation is he just had an interview recently, and Jerry points out he has spinach in his teeth. And they cut to George's interview. It's really brief, but George is sitting across from the interviewer, and the interviewer is kind of making, you know, like a noise with his teeth, trying to tell George you have something there. We bounce back to Jerry's storyline, and his is about meeting this woman in an elevator.
Right.
And then it cuts to Jerry and the woman in the elevator. Now that method of kind of cutting to what the characters, you know, went through, that seemed new and something that didn't happen that often on Seinfeld. We notice how there's a lot of monologue. You know, a character will just tell a story for a minute or two.
I think that was because that scene at the newsstand required an amount of exposition where you wanted to chop it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and also it was the beginning of, you know, Larry being very experimental with things. So, yeah, I mean, that's a good observation that it was new and everything like that. But at the same time, if you're going to have a really long conversation and you could show something visually to cut out 5 lines of dialogue, you know, instead of Jerry having to go say, so, you know, I'm standing next to her in the elevator and I said to her, you know, those crop circles, I was responsible for them. So instead of doing all that, you just show it.
Mm-hmm.
And also then you establish the woman, too. You know, it was definitely an expedient way of doing things. And, you know, I guess visually more pleasing. You know, I mean, it's supposed to be a visual medium, not that it is, but, you know, I mean, Seinfeld was not a visual show for the most part. It was talking. It was a dialogue show.
Right, which is actually why I have so much trouble watching most sitcoms, especially today, because it just seems too busy. It doesn't seem like it's getting to the basics, which is what I think Seinfeld did so well. But let's move on to the Good Samaritan episode, actually, which I remember I tweeted you, I think, months ago, and you commented that you felt like you didn't do a really good job on this episode.
No, it was just I had the concept. But I don't know. I just didn't really pull it together in the writing, and Larry and Jerry, you know, did a really amazing job of cobbling together my little ideas and bringing it back around. That was really at a time when I was pretty much struggling with the whole concept of creativity. You know, coming up with the kind of ideas that are interesting for the show and stuff like that. You know, that was really hard for me. You know, I was very used to looking out at the world and reporting on it. And now, especially at that time of the show early on, you had to really look within yourself. You had to really be aware of your own little thoughts. Now, the first thing about Jerry seeing a car, you know, plunk a parked car and drive off and follow the driver to confront her, and then seeing this pretty girl get out of the car, that was the thought that started the whole script. And, you know, and that part was fine. But I don't think on any of the other stories, for the most part, I really did a very good job at all. You know, I actually did a pretty crummy job.
And well, that episode is special also because it was the first and I think only episode directed by Jason Alexander, and that seemed like a real interesting kind of change up. Just because when I think of Seinfeld, I think of Tom Sharonis, I think of Andy Ackerman, and is it David Steinberg? Did he direct a few?
He did a few in the beginning, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just interesting. Like Jason had a hand at doing that. Were you ever, since you didn't feel good about the episode, were you kind of like, oh no, I should have given him a better episode, or?
Oh no, God! Look, Tom Sharonis was there for the entire shoot. It wasn't like it was Jason's set for that week. Mm-hmm. You know, he got to direct the episode, but Tom Sharonis was over his shoulder the entire time. If for nothing else, you know, that got Jason a directing credit and into the DGA.
Mm-hmm. You know, and I think directing on a sitcom, I don't think like you can really explore that much and you know, be that creative since you're so limited with a set. But watching a lot of these episodes, really meticulously checking it out, it's just incredible. Some of the shots that Tom came up with, especially as the show moved on and you guys were able to build more sets and you know, just do different things.
Yeah, well, more Andy actually.
True. Yes. The show, again, there is that change, you know, when Larry left, but even when Tom left, it changes even more, I would argue, visually at least.
It probably got better visually.
Mm-hmm.
Because Andy was, you know, top notch. You know, I mean, Andy was really special because, you know, first and foremost, if you're somebody who's directing 22 episodes of one show, the toughest part of your job, in a way, is keeping a happy set. You know, you're the director on the set, and you're on the floor with those actors day in and day out, and it's kind of up to you to keep a happy set and to keep the actors happy. You know, and Andy Ackerman is a very calm, really easygoing, and just a great, sensitive, smart person. So he was amazing at that. Mm-hmm. The fact that he also was an editor and had a great eye for everything, you know, was almost secondary. But, you know, he was the ultimate combination of everything you would want in a sitcom director.
Yeah, I hope we can get a chance to talk to him someday. I know he's a pretty busy guy as well.
Well, you know, Andy pretty much gets the first shot at like every sitcom that comes out. So they're basically, as far as, you know, studio 4-camera shows, there are two directors who get everything right now. Andy Ackerman and Pam Fryman basically get the first offer on anything they want. Mm-hmm. You know, it used to be Jim Burrows. Actually, my most satisfying moment, well, one of my most satisfying moments was after we shot the pilot to It's Like You Know, my show, after Seinfeld. And, you know, Andy shot the pilot. And one day I'm walking on the lot and I pass Jim Burrows and he says to me, like almost accusatorily, like, why wasn't I given an offer to shoot your pilot? And because I had 5 years with Andy Ackerman.
I know the face so well from, he was in The Comeback, wasn't he? Kind of playing himself.
Oh, probably.
Well, Peter, let's move on to The Virgin here. And this is an episode that we didn't get to talk about last time. I was just curious because the behind-the-scenes sort of trivia I read up on said that this story originated with the Farrelly brothers. Is that right?
It's not really right. The fact of the matter is, you know, sometimes there are ideas that are just in the air. I pitched the idea to Larry that Jerry dates a girl who's a virgin, and I had the whole scene in it where she announces that to Jerry, and then Elaine enters and tells this funny story about how her diaphragm went flying out of her purse. And that was like the whole idea I had. And Larry goes, I love that, and I love the Elaine thing. One little problem. We got a pitch from somebody else about Jerry dating a virgin, so you're going to have to share the story credit. And, I didn't care. Fine, whatever. I had no idea who the Farrelly brothers were. And it's funny because I always wanted to meet them. I heard that they were such great guys, and I always wanted to meet them and laugh about that. But at the time, I just thought it was, some pitch from somebody who was, out there freelancing and came up with an idea. And to tell you the truth, I didn't even know until years later that it was the Farrelly brothers. I didn't even pay attention to the name on the credit.
And I mean, really, they're just covering their bases, legally, I guess, right? I mean, that's all it was. It wasn't a...
Well, yeah, that was the...
Let's bring these guys in. Mm-hmm.
That was the ethical thing to do. They did pitch the idea. The fact of the matter is, I pitched the same idea independently of them, but, and technically if they had wanted to get away, if, Larry wanted to say, look, you pitched the idea and he pitched the idea, and, we could have probably, eliminated them from the process, but, there was a good ethic as far as the show is concerned, and, we did the morally correct thing.
I'm sure anyone who's ever worked on Seinfeld as a writer just gets bombarded with people, pitching them ideas, saying, "Oh, hey, I have this great idea for you," and I would imagine it would drive you mad. How did those pitches actually get to Larry? I'm talking about professional writers here. Were they taking ideas, or did they try to keep things in house with staff writers?
Well, it got to the point where the show was so relatable to people that we were getting pitches by the thousands, and we were getting spec scripts in, just, unsolicited spec scripts mailed in. Mm-hmm. And I know early on there was some legal problem about somebody claiming that it was their idea for this or that. And I had to write a letter that basically said, thank you for your pitch. We really know how much work you put into this, and unfortunately we can't read it. And it was a funny letter, and I got a ton of thank you notes for my rejection letter. But, we had the letter boilerplated, and every month or so I would literally have to sign my name to about 125 or 200 rejection letters in one sitting.
Were you the only one that had to handle these rejection letters, or did you guys share the load? Or
oh, that was just me. Once a month I could sit down and sign my name a bunch of times. It was no big deal.
Mm-hmm. The Virgin's an interesting episode too, because there's this, I don't know, it's the 50th episode. I think that's a pretty cool honor to know you wrote the 50th episode of Seinfeld, among other things. But it featured the return of Ping, who was the delivery boy in the tape from season 3.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting because something Seinfeld didn't really do much of was having a lot of early on recurring characters. And maybe that's because you guys hadn't established as many characters as you did by season 6, 7, 8. But was that idea yours? Do you recall to hey, let's bring back this, I don't want to say forgettable, but this minor character from a random episode in season 3, or was there ever a plan to try to experiment with returning characters?
No, that was purely accidental. What happened was that I had this idea for it's actually a different episode. It's actually the visa, I think we're talking about, aren't we?
Oh, is it?
Because as I remember, in the visa episode, I had this idea of George meeting a girl in the coffee shop and somehow having a day where everything out of his mouth is really funny, and the girl thinks he's a riot, and then he doesn't want the girl to be around Jerry because, Jerry will make him seem a lot less funny. So we held our normal auditions for the girl, and as it turned out, she was Asian. She actually was Korean, Maggie Han, but she was Asian. And once she was Asian, then it worked out that there was another story that Ping would, now I'm getting it. Yeah, in that episode, which was episode like 10 of that season or 9, right, that's the one where Elaine caused Ping to crash his bicycle.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know. It was there was a lot of accidents of casting, but I'm totally wrong about this as I'm looking back.
No, but you...
Want me to start the question again?
As you called me out on it, I had to check my notes, and it is a bit confusing because, Ping, this random character from season 3, Ping Wu, the actor, was brought in to film The Virgin, and then that storyline was continued after the accident in The Virgin, was continued in The Visa, and Cheryl turned out to be his cousin. So that there's that happy accident there.
Right. So yeah, so I don't exactly remember any conscious decision to bring back an actor, but kind of the idea of of Elaine causing a delivery man to crash and then being threatened with a lawsuit was just an idea, and Ping's first episode, which was Tom Leopold's show, was just a riot. And I always think of that scene when Ping is translating for George when he's talking to the guy in China with the hair growth remedy. And then he hangs up, they finish talking about that, and Ping just kind of leans back on the couch and he's talking in Chinese to this guy in China, and Jerry's just standing over him, and finally Jerry smiles and he goes, kind of an expensive call. And I always remember that moment. But
he even picks up a magazine, I think, at one point and just starts leafing through it.
And the funny thing is, in The Visa, as I said, we just cast an Asian girl for this part. So then that dictated the fact of, wait a minute, we could use her as a lawyer and continue that Ping story.
With The Virgin, was that kind of a controversial premise at the time? I mean, this is this is the episode right before the contest, which I think kind of opened the floodgates sort of to different ideas that you normally wouldn't be able to pitch. But was that at all risque, would you say, from a network standpoint?
They didn't seem to have any problem with it. Mm-hmm. And, we were already kind of building up to some fairly crazy stuff. We had an episode just before that where, we had this bubble boy, and it turns out that, you have this guy who's got this terrible physical condition, and we made him into an incredible prick. That was kind of groundbreaking. It was kind of like nobody, even a totally sick person who had this horrible illness, had to be likable. So, I think the ground was breaking, and also up until that point, Kramer had burned down Susan's family cabin. I mean, a lot of bad things were happening. So dating a girl who happened to be a virgin, I don't think was, that tough for anybody to deal with. To tell you the truth, in that very same episode, they pitch their show to the network, and George is already dating Susan, and in the meeting, at the end, he kisses her goodbye, and that gets her fired. And after the table read, Castle Rock was much more upset about that the guys were incredibly callous about having gotten this girl fired. And there were big discussions about that. And I remember Glenn Padnick from Castle Rock saying, I mean, don't you think they should be a little bit more upset about the fact that, you know, they got this woman fired from her job? And I kind of shrugged, and Glenn got really mad at me. And, you know, I had to call up Glenn at Castle Rock later and say to him, look, you know, I didn't mean to, you know, I didn't mean to demean your feelings about this, and I'm sorry it came off that way. And, you know, Glenn said, you know, it's okay. I just appreciate the call very much. And, you know, we were very close and friendly for the remainder of the run. And, you know, I still totally love bumping into him. But, you know, that was like a very tense moment. So it's very hard to predict what is going to offend the network.
Right, right.
You know, the funny thing is, if it dealt with sex, they were looser about it because they like dealing with sex, you know, especially something that subtle. You know, they always want to deal with sex because, you know, that's ratings.
Sure. And, you know, everyone at home sort of like, you know, elbowing each other, you know what they're talking about, right?
Yeah, and, you know, she's this proper British girl who happens to tell Jerry in a very confessional, very sweet moment that she happens to be a virgin. But, you know, in a way, the worst part of it is, like, you know, she's embarrassed to tell him, and then Elaine comes in, and she goes into the story, and she goes, so, like, I open my wallet, and my diaphragm comes flying out. And the audience laugh was huge. I mean, huge. That's another one where if you look at the reaction shots, there are like 4 or 5 reaction shots to when Elaine starts telling that story.
Mm-hmm. Or if that laughter were taken out, you're wondering why are these people standing around for 10 seconds in silence, you know, while it's dying down.
Yeah. The funny thing is, you know, later I kind of experimented with that in the other direction because, you know, in season 8, when George decides that he's going to leave his attaché case behind in the foundation with a tape recorder playing in it to see if they talk about him when they leave, you know, there's a moment like he picks it up later and he actually rewinds the tape, and
right.
You know, like right in the living room. And they sit there for 12 seconds waiting for the tape to rewind. I mean, that's 12 seconds of dead air on a network show. So that was really fun. I love that.
Yes. I actually completely forgot about that, but it's hitting me because there's a moment where you're like, oh, you know, the joke would reach this point, but you guys just keep pushing it further and further.
That was a great moment. And, you know, when we saw it in the editing room, we were like, no matter how long this is, we are keeping that. Every inch of that. You know, dead air space is really important to comedy. Whether you're doing stand-up or in the writing, you know, taking your time and having a little dead air is really important.
One last question for the visa, Peter. There's a... This is such a nitpick, like a specific question, but that whole idea of the lawsuit, you know, with Cheryl, George's girlfriend, you know, being Pink's cousin, there's sort of like this lingering threat at the end of, you know, this lawsuit is back on and Elaine's going to get taken down, and then it never gets brought up again. Do you recall, at least from Larry's point of view, why that is? Because it seems like he and the rest of the writers really prided themselves in continuity, and if not bringing a storyline into another episode, at least addressing it. Were there ever discussions for continuing this storyline, like parallel with the pilot subplot?
Well, the truth of the matter is that episode was episode 14. That season, we did 24. When you're at episode 14, and you started shooting in August, and now it's February, you can't imagine how much you're basically sucking wind. Just trying to limp across the finish line. I mean, that is when it's really hard. And it's sometimes like impossible to kind of see the forest for the trees. And, you know, I think in one way Larry was much more focused on getting to the pilot episode. You know, that was the real overarching arc of that season. And sometimes things just get waylaid, you know, and I'm pretty sure that's what happened with that. You know, it just somehow, you know, just frittered away. And now that you mention it, I wish I had thought of doing it. But, you know, I mean, I wrote that episode, and by the time we're shooting it, I'm already in the middle of another. And so, you know, I was thinking of the next episode, which is the implant, you know, in the middle of all that. So, you know, it's really hard to step back and say, hey, wait a minute, we left this hanging. You know, which Larry very rarely did leave something hanging, but, you know, at times things happen, you know, and I'm sure we could have done great things with it. It probably would have been you know, if you had brought this up at the time, it would have really helped.
If only I was there. Yeah, it sounds a little ridiculous from my point of view, I think, because
Actually, it doesn't. The more I think about it, the more I was like, you know, like, boy, that would have been actually a really good thing to do.
Right. I mean, it's so easy for him. If only these decisions could be made, you know, from the comfort of my own house.
She was a great actress, Maggie Hahn. I mean, killer line reading. She was really good and super smart. You know, she was a Harvard girl who was, like, great, you know. We were pretty friendly for a few years, and she was just great, and Ping was always a riot. And, you know, it would have been a really good Elaine story. I think we should go back and do it.
Why not, right? I'm sure with all of these, I mean, Full House coming back, what else? Coach. I don't see why they won't bring Seinfeld back eventually.
They're bringing back Coach?
Yeah. I don't know, like, where it is in the development stage, but that was probably the most just ridiculous idea I've ever heard. Like, I got Full House because I think Full House was somewhat bigger than Coach. But yeah, I just don't see the appeal of, you know, Craig T. Nelson coming back, but I guess that would be
I never saw one episode of either show, so.
You know, I don't think you're missing out on much.
I never really watched sitcoms. So.
Yeah, I would imagine. Was that, you know, like when you're working on a show like Seinfeld, you don't really have time, one, for watching TV, but also you wouldn't want, or you don't have any interest, really.
I never had any interest anyway.
Well, you know, Peter, moving on to the implant, which I think it's safe to say this is one of the biggest episodes you ever wrote, right?
Yeah.
Not only from the like the quotability factor, but you know, I was watching an interview. Actually, I was listening to your commentary on the DVDs, and you said you were really proud of this episode.
Yes, that is really the first episode where I felt like I did a great job. What was really nice later on, like, you know, at that point, Larry and Jerry took the first pass at editing it, and the editor of the show dropped by my office and poked their head in and quietly said to me, Larry and Jerry were talking about how this was the most well-written script that they've ever had, you know, so that was really gratifying.
Wow, yeah. Just hearing that, I'm sure.
It was just a great week. It was a great week.
Yeah, you know, I was just looking at the final, like, 4 or 5 episodes to season 4, and I always thought that, you know, especially when you have this big arc leading up, and you have this big finale planned, or obviously, you know, some payoff is coming, I feel like a lot of the episodes leading up to those moments can be a little light, maybe not the strongest episodes. But
right.
when I was watching the last couple episodes, I was just blown away, not only by the implant, but also by the Smelly Car. I think those are 2 wonderful episodes, and I don't think it's a coincidence. You know, hey, they're written by you. But something like the implant, especially, that seems like it would be, you know, in the earlier half of the season or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it was. Those 2 were very kind of like standalone episodes,
and really strong at that. Can you just give us some context for the implant? Because from what I heard, you had a lot of little ideas that just kind of fit.
Yeah, I thought I had I thought I finally hit on the exact process of doing this show. Just basically coming up with 3 or 4 really funny scenes and finding a way of putting them together into one show. And I had that for that one. Like I had the idea of somebody double dipping a chip. Then I also had the idea of Jerry and Elaine talking about somebody, some girl, and Elaine going, they're fake. And Jerry, saying, you don't know that. Go in, do some research. What do you know? And then I also had the idea of George trying to get a Death in the Family fair. I love that idea. And then there was a guy in my health club one day who I thought looked a little like Salman Rushdie. And at the time, that was really funny because Salman Rushdie had a fatwa put on him and he was in hiding. So it would be so funny of Kramer thinking that Salman Rushdie was in his health club. So, I love that idea because it was very current. And I love the implant idea because nobody had really touched on breast implants in sitcoms yet. And then, I love the double dipping idea because it was small and just a little tiny slice of life. So all those ideas were great. And I thought, boy, I really have this Seinfeld writing thing licked now, boy. There's nothing that's going to stop me. This is just the way I'll do every episode. I'll just come up with these funny scenes and put them together. And it never worked for me again.
Did you, at the time or after this point, did you start doing the whole notebook idea, just writing little ideas as as they hit you, or? Oh,
I have been doing that for years. Mm-hmm. I've been doing that way before Seinfeld. But it changed. Obviously Seinfeld changed it to funny story ideas. Before that, I used to write down sometimes funny observations, but also, I was writing articles and things like that, and I just think of word usages I like and things like that. So it definitely changed, but I had been keeping a notebook, and to this day keep a notebook, the same notebook basically, all this time. I've basically been keeping this notebook for 30 years.
Wow.
Well, I put them in my iPhone when I think of them, but then later I write them into this book.
If I could just say something real quick about the implant that I've noticed in, I want to say your episodes more than anyone else's, and that's the ability to not only introduce sort of the main theme or the main idea of the episode immediately, but you're able to stretch it across the entire episode. You have these scenes with Jerry and Elaine throughout the implant, and it's almost the same conversation each time.
Yes.
But it's so brilliant because I'm never thinking all right, we're spinning our wheels here. I'm just hearing the same conversation. You're able to just get so much material out of one simple idea, which I just wanted to compliment you on because I think that's a really difficult thing to do.
Thanks. Yeah, I really liked that in that episode too, that, it starts out with that conversation. And basically, in that conversation alone, you get 3 storylines going. You have Jerry in the implant, you have George, who has gone out on 9 dates with a girl and gotten nowhere. And then you have Elaine doing this reconnaissance work on the girl who may or may not have implants. So you're talking about a 40-second scene and establishing three stories right there, which is, that's one of the other things I really love about that episode is that not only does it shoot out of the starting gate really fast, but, the whole first act feels like it takes 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. It flies. If you watch that episode, from the beginning to the first commercial, it flies by. It feels like it's 2 minutes, and it's actually 9. But, when it feels like it goes really fast, that's great.
And there's certain, staples of every episode, you have to have a coffee shop scene. And there's no coffee shop scene in that entire episode.
Coffee shop scenes in that episode take place in the sauna.
Oh, right, of course.
And that was at a time when we didn't necessarily have endless amounts of money to spend on every episode. You had to think a little bit about the economics of things. So instead of having to, have the coffee shop lighted and everything like that, we stuck the sauna in the coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
So, it saved money, and, because otherwise we would have had to put the sauna somewhere else. It ended up saving a lot of money.
Absolutely. Well, Peter, could you explain kind of how Terry Hatcher was cast in the role? Because I would say that she is one of the most memorable guest stars you've ever had on the show. And that's not only because of her, but it's, of course, I think because of the character she got to play. Was that just sort of a happy sort of accident, or?
I'll tell you what happened. A week or so before we did the casting, I was at a restaurant and Terry Hatcher was at the next table, and I could, barely keep my eyes in my head. Then a week later comes, we start auditioning. We have one actress comes in. Her name was Vanessa Angel. And, she's pretty good, And then the casting person says, we should think about, what would you think about Terry Hatcher? And I immediately go, yes, just cast her. And Larry's like, are you sure? And, the casting person told Larry that she'd be great, and she's a star on the rise. And so, literally ended the audition right there and cast her.
Oh, wow.
I should say that somebody in that casting session, not Larry, not Jerry, nobody you'd really hear, but somebody you'd know of, I'm going to leave them nameless, in that casting session objected to her because he didn't think that she had big enough breasts.
Wow.
That was really one of the more revolting moments I can remember.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, I'm sure, it always takes you by surprise. You're like, wow, someone's actually going to go there. and they were serious, right? Or, even if they were joking.
Oh, they were dead serious. And it was almost like they totally didn't get the point of the show. There was a certain subtlety to the show.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't want to get somebody who was, a 36 double D,
Right.
If you could do an episode about masturbation without mentioning it and doing it in a totally tasteful way, you should be able to do an episode about a breast implant and handle it.
Oh, yeah. I'm actually looking at a few of our listeners had questions for you via Facebook, and someone was asking if Andy here was asking if, the implant, was this, again, pushing boundaries at the time? Was this something that was controversial, similar to, again, you said the contest, I guess, wasn't that big of an issue, right?
It wasn't, and we were shocked by that. After Larry gave it to me, and this was, right after the Virgin episode, Larry dropped in my office and handed me the script for the contest. And I read it, and I went into his office, and I put it on his desk, and I said, God, I am so depressed. This is so fucking good. And he goes, oh, you being depressed about how good it is? That's the best compliment I could get. Mm-hmm. And then he looks at me and goes, you think they'll let us do it? And then we had the table read, and I think it was the first time I had any table read where the network and Castle Rock had absolutely no notes.
Wow.
If you're going to push the lines, you do it slowly. But then again, with the implant, again, you're doing a story about breasts. A network is going to like that.
Mm-hmm. It's just so funny, though. Like what you said this earlier, though. You go into a situation expecting them to go after, this issue, but they go after something completely different.
Yeah.
That really isn't an issue whatsoever. It's just, someone might have a, like a personal hang up with it, or, I don't know, maybe it offends a sponsor. Who knows?
Yeah. I don't know. We didn't really have that many problems like that. The episode where Jerry was, a godfather at the Brits, that was, people had real problems with that.
Mm-hmm. Was that mainly because of how the Moyle was represented, or?
Yeah, there was a lot of blowback on that. I think it never really was in reruns either.
Wow. So that was, I mean, I'd say like the one controversial Seinfeld episode, at least like in the mainstream, seems to be the Puerto Rican Day with the whole like flag burning scene. But it sounds like maybe the Briss is sort of in that camp as well, but it's not publicized, I guess.
Yeah, I don't remember much about the Puerto Rican Day Parade. I was that in season 8 or 9?
Oh, that was 9, and that was I think
I wasn't even on the show then.
Yeah, and that was it's really odd too because it's the penultimate episode. So so talk about an episode that's sort of just kind of pushed at the last possible minute.
Yeah, and the funny thing is between that and the shooting the final episode, Andy Eckerman, he got ill.
Oh, really?
He really had, he got physically ill for a long time. I mean, he had this, he was, I don't know what exactly it was, but he was having dizzy spells. It was really bad. The Puerto Rican Parade was apparently just like a nightmare to shoot. It was a bad idea I've never seen it, but, having a whole episode of taking place outside like that with the Puerto Rican Day Parade, that is so not what the show is about.
Yeah, it is one of the oddest, one of the weirdest tones I think that the show has ever explored. And I would think logistically, just the daylight aspect of it all, and I mean everyone's stationary, but still, what a nightmare.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, moving on to the final episode you wrote for season 4, The Smelly Car. I mentioned this earlier. I'm actually a huge fan of this episode, and it was one that completely took me by surprise because I knew the premise. It's pretty well known, but I couldn't remember that much, specifically from the episode. And when I put it on, I thought it was just so funny. And I love, once again, you taking, one simple idea and just stretching it throughout an entire episode. Did this come from a personal experience? Like, did you have a stinky valet or?
The same friend whose father said the nose job stuff, he went to a restaurant called Marek's Tex-Mex in Santa Monica, and he could not get the smell of the valet's BO out of his car, no matter what he did. And then that's kind of like a fairly big idea. It took me a long time to even realize that would make a good Seinfeld. It just wasn't the kind of idea I was looking for, but then I was thinking, that is pretty funny. Mm. The other ideas in it, George not rewinding a tape back, all the way back, back then when you rented a videotape, you were supposed to rewind it, but he probably left it unrewound at a point where, the girl was naked, where the girl in the movie was naked. And then, him being worried that he led Susan to become a lesbian. Those were good stories. And, the great thing about the Smelly Car is that whatever any of the other characters are doing, you could have them go through that car and the smell would attach itself to them and it would ruin their day, or whatever they were up to would be ruined because all of a sudden they would smell. It got in Elaine's hair, it ruined the relationship no matter what she did. It got on Kramer's jacket. Everything could be run through that car, and that's what you want. To connect the whole show together through that Smelly Car.
Did it just seem natural for you from, the smell attaching itself to all the characters that and this is actually coming from Facebook, Cynthia was wondering, like, did it just seem natural that it would, just Jerry leaving the car, abandoning it? Is that the only idea that really made sense?
Yeah. I mean, we did so much washing of that car and ionizing and everything like that, and I did all this research to find out, what you do if your car smells that bad, or what you do if, a really bad smell gets in your hair. And so, Elaine basically just gave up on the relationship, and Jerry just basically gave up on his car.
Yeah. And what's wild is I remember there's a guy, Jerry, gives the keys to, and the guy, I guess, understands, oh, this guy's just giving me his car, and he gets in, and, the smell attacks him. I had no idea that was Grant Heslov.
That was Grant?
Yeah.
I haven't seen the episode in so long. Grant was, kind of like a Newman-like character on It's Like You Know. I didn't even know that. I was really, I was pretty friendly with Grant for a long time.
That's wild.
I had no idea that was him. I swear, I haven't seen the episode in so long that I don't even remember. It's
almost unrecognizable because he has long hair, a hat on. It's sort of hard because I kind of attribute, his hair to just like the full face. But yeah, it's wild. I think it's one of his earlier, acting stints.
God, that is so funny. I can't believe it. I mean, I spent a lot of time with Grant on It's Like You Know. Mm-hmm. And he's obviously got a huge career now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I knew him as an actor first and foremost, and then I see him accepting a Best Picture award for Argo.
He's a really, really, really smart guy and a great guy. He's just a great guy. Mm-hmm. I'm really happy for him.
One last thing I wanted to bring up regarding the Smelly Car is an interview I saw on the DVD with Heidi Swedberg, and she commented specifically on this episode how much she loved it, and she didn't say this exactly. I got the vibe that this was one of, if not her favorite episode, because of your writing. She even called you out and said how you were always, or she was really fond of your episodes because you were really kind to her and gave her a lot of jokes. And I know, recently, at least on Twitter, it's really dumb. I know Heidi Swedberg had been brought up a lot because of comments Jason had made recently about how, it's kind of, difficult for the two actors to not get along, but really kind of click. I love the Smelly Car for a lot of reasons, but Heidi Swedberg in particular, because I think what you did with her arc was just brilliant. Her dabbling in lesbianism, as it were. And was that like a conscious decision for you? Did you feel like the Susan character didn't really have a lot of funny material to work with? She really is sort of like this straight character, an outsider from the main four.
I wasn't really, somehow, whatever problem there was with Heidi, I was never really that aware of it. I think that was more, whatever there was, it was more on the set and didn't really filter back up to the writers. So when all that stuff came out, I was kind of taken by surprise. But, I can't say I was trying to get her funnier stuff because, I wanted the four characters on the show to be driving the action. So I never really thought of, having one of the outside characters really pushing the action. The fact that George suspected that she became a lesbian because of him, was good for her because she got to be the one who could say, "You're an idiot."
Right.
Like all of a sudden, she wasn't given that kind of stuff to do before. So it was a very good episode for her because, she usually got to react and she was kind of like on the defensive all the time and she was at the mercy of these four characters who would do horrible things to her. And this time, just because of a funny situation, it happened to change her part a lot. Mm-hmm. She got to be like the smarter person in the story.
Well, watching season 4, she really goes through a lot of shit, from, from not only getting fired, but, it starts with Kramer vomiting on her, the cabin burning down, finding out that her father is a closeted homosexual. Like, it really, George and the gang are ruining her life. And I always found it really rewarding, as a viewer to have this character sort of rise above it all and sort of realize, like, I know who I'm talking to. Like, I know who George Costanza is, and I'm going to call him out on it.
That's a great thing because you realize that all of that, what happens to her, is, coming out of those four characters. Like, if you're going to get involved with these people, we're going to ruin your life, and that's what the show should be because that means that your four main characters are driving all the action. the worst episodes to me were like when they bring in some kind of outside character and, and that person would be, weird and quirky, and our characters would just react to them. Like the time when Kramer had, that caddy who was giving him advice all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Kramer wasn't funny in that episode at all. The caddy got all the laughs.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you don't want.
Did that happen a lot, or was that something you guys just tried to, avoid?
Well, I think it happened more later.
Right.
Newman and all those characters, they were fantastic. But, I personally, I didn't even want them in the show that much.
Right. You wanted the focus to be on the main four.
Yeah.
As much as possible.
But I always try to, have the main four characters pushing off, and getting the funny parts,
Well, one last thing before we go, since we ended this season with the pilot, I was pleasantly surprised to see you standing in Monks during that final scene. I think there are a few other actors there with you, Bill Masters, Steve Scroven. I don't know if you recall that at all, but
yeah, I kind of remember that.
Mm-hmm. Was that something? Just the idea of cameos. One of our listeners, Toby here, was wondering: is that something that you guys jumped at, or were they at the last minute, just like, hey, we need someone?
Usually last minute. And on that particular episode, almost the entire cast and crew were in the show.
Right.
All those crew people were our actual crew people. So that was just like everybody who worked on the show pretty much was in the show, that episode.
Well, Peter, again, I want to thank you so much for giving us your time. This is incredible. And I know all of our listeners really appreciate it. So for the second time, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find more of your work or get in contact with you if they'd like to?
I have a website, pmehlman.com. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and my home address is. I'm eminently reachable.
Excellent. Well, again, it means the world to me to do this, to have you on. So thank you again, Peter Mehlman, for joining us.
My pleasure. Take care.